And welcome. This contract we will return to our public session at 6 p.m. All right. Mrs. Underhill, do you want to lead us in our moment of silence and pledge, please? Thank you. Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. All right, moving on to 5.1, address agenda and consider adoption or recommend changes. Ms. Hill, any items that you would like to move in the agenda or make any changes to the agenda this evening?
No, thank you.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingerelli?
No, thank you.
All right, with all that said, I do need a motion to approve this evening's agenda, which includes the consent agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as stated.
I'll second that. Ms. Contra, we have a motion made by Mrs. Underhill, second by myself. Is everybody logged in okay, Ms. Hill? Okay. Ms. Contra, for this item, can you run us through a voice vote, please?
Absolutely. Representative Pingerelli.
Aye.
President Sandoval.
Aye.
Mrs. Underhill.
Aye.
Dr. Sorensen.
Aye.
Mrs. Hill.
Aye.
That's okay. Looks like motion passes based on the voice votes. 5 ayes. Okay, perfect. All right, moving on to section 6, recognitions. Ms. Ari, welcome.
Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds, and guests that have joined us here this evening. As you probably heard the sounds coming from the lobby this evening, we were so pleased to have students joining us, many students. They were here performing for us under the direction of Mr. Moss, one of our very fine arts educators here in the district. Mr. Orlando Moss shares his music and teaching skills with students at Frontier, Coyote Hills, and Peoria Traditional School. And so this evening, you are listening to the sounds of 7th and 8th grade students from Coyote Hills and Peoria Traditional School. They began participating in the orchestra in the 5th grade with Mr. Moss, and so they are no strangers to performance. They're one of only a couple strings groups that we have here in the Peoria Unified School District. They've performed at various local venues, such as Orchard Point Elderly Home during the holidays, and they will be performing this December on stage at Dave & Buster's. We have asked them to be here this evening, and as you can see, we have filled up our boardroom with their fan club, and so we are going to bring our performers in this evening and ask them to crowd right in front of you here, board members, so you may have to scoot just a little bit out of the way in order to see them. But students, if you would please come up front, and while they make their way, can we give them a big round of applause? And as you can see, supporting them this evening is our Arts Education Director, Mr. Rob Panzer, who oversees all of our arts programming here in Peoria Unified. We are so very fortunate to have incredible arts programs like the ones that you got to hear this evening, and these students who are doing wonderful things musically at their school and representing their school and our district so well. Here representing all 3 of the schools where Mr. Moss teaches our students, we have invited Mrs. Julie Abbott to join me here, and I know that she has a few remarks that she would like to make. And I'd also like to recognize Mr. Nitschke, who is here from Peoria Traditional School. I saw him sneak in as well. So at this time, I will turn it over to Mrs. Abbott.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Airy. Good evening, Dr. Reynolds, President Sandoval, and governing board members. I believe you're back there somewhere behind our kiddos. Thank you for the honor of showcasing our string students at tonight's meeting. I would like to share some more information about our program. And while I'm doing that, I think, Mr. Moss, you have something to present to Dr. Reynolds? We do. Okay, so while he is doing that, I'm going to go ahead and give a little more information about our program. So I believe he has an engraved case and baton by our orchestra as an honorary conductor. And I believe, Dr. Reynolds, that might be a little enticement for you.
And if you would like, we're performing December 15th at Dave & Buster's. I would love for him to come.
Yes. So I think that's just a little something to get you there to perform. So thank you for that. As Ms. Airy said, we have both Peoria Traditional and Coyote Hills students in our program, making up 98 students total under the direction of Mr. Moss. The goal of our program is to provide rigorous instruction and to get our students performance ready, which you saw this evening. They're definitely performance ready. Tonight we have students featured from our 7th and 8th grade advanced strings class, and this is just one of the many performances, as Ms. Airy said, of the school year. We are so grateful for the opportunity to showcase them. Thank you for the honor and privilege of allowing our wonderful students here. So on behalf of Mr. Nitschke and myself, thank you very much. We appreciate the honor.
Thank you, Mrs. Abbott. And I know our governing board may have some comments to share, and we're a bit crowded this morning. So students, I'm going to ask you to hold right there for a quick second. We have a photographer that is capturing this shot for us, so keep smiling. And parents, this is a good last opportunity to snap away, but just in case you missed the moment, do know that this is being live streamed to our community, and you'll be able to go back and play it again on our district's YouTube channel, and certainly you'll be able to share it as well. So we've captured that moment. I'm going to ask you students, if you can, right down the middle where I'm standing, to squish, to separate in two and squish a little bit to the sides, just so we can make room for President Sandoval, as I'm sure he may have some remarks to share. And of course, Mrs. Abbott will stay with me in case there are any comments for her. President Sandoval, I will turn it over to you.
Wow. No, thank you for that. And look, when we talk about the many programs that we offer here as a district, you know, our arts programs are programs that really bring out a lot of courage, right, in our students. I mean, when you put yourself out there, whether it's, in this case, performing and not knowing how a crowd is going to react, that takes a lot of courage. So congratulations on what you do every day to be the best versions of yourselves. Mr. Nitschke, Savage, Mr. Moss, thank you, for just your intentionality every day, again, of lifting up our students and, and giving them the belief and confidence that they can succeed, in Peoria Unified School District. Thank you for that. Students, once again, congratulations, great job. Keep up the great work. Parents, thank you for your partnership. Without you being involved in your child's education, what we do here in Peoria Unified doesn't happen. So thank you very much. Congratulations again.
And President Sandoval, I know we may want to have our students led out so they don't have to go through the rest of the governing board meeting up at the front. And certainly they may have homework and things to get to this evening. So Mr. Moss and students, once again, thank you.
Great job. Great job. You're welcome. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.
We just cleared the room. It's so funny too, because I pulled up, there were so many cars. I'm like, oh. Crazy. It's gonna be a quiet evening.
All right, very good. Ms. Yeri, we are still on.
President Sandoval,
Recognitions.
members of the
Yeah.
board, Dr. Reynolds, thank you once again. We have an additional recognition for you this evening. As you know, we've spent a little bit of time, well, a lot of time here in the district talking about student voice and how important it is to the work that we do. You should know that throughout the year, Dr. Reynolds and our leadership team gets an opportunity to meet with students, gather feedback from them, and learn a little bit more through their perspective what is going on in our schools today. Representing the Superintendent's Student Advisory Council this evening, I'm so pleased to introduce Liberty Student Body President, Molly McLeod.
Good
Welcome.
evening. Thank you. Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the board, and Dr. Reynolds. My name is Molly McLeod, and once again, I am here representing Liberty High School and the Superintendent's Advisory Council.
Well, again, welcome. Ms. Hill, questions, comments?
Well, welcome. We're really happy to have you here. It's great to have representation from the schools. You're why we're here. So we're very pleased that you're here and hopefully don't get too bored.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen?
Yeah, Molly, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mrs. Underhill?
Yeah, it's great to have you here, and we look forward to having you hear more and to hearing your input. And it's neat that you're part of that. That whole collaboration between all of the schools is wonderful. So we appreciate the time that you're taking to do all of the things that you do. And Liberty, that's a big school, so good for you. But thanks again. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Representative Pingerelli?
Well, thank you for being here, and I think we should have had you up first, so you would have had a huge audience, but we do appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
President Sandoval, I could just jump in
Sure,
before
absolutely.
you wrap it up. First of all, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Molly is a leader among leaders in the way that she works in the superintendent student advisory, and her feedback and her perspective is just, it's really, really refreshing and welcomed, and an important part of our process to continually improve and make sure that we keep a student-centered focus. So we really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Dr. Reynolds.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And Ms. Hill, you also brought up, it is our students, our young scholars, are the reason why we're here. And I too applaud you for your leadership and to step into that role and to represent your peers and be the voice of your peers. And it is, critical, to us as a board and as a district to have the feedback, really the input, right, from our students in all that we do. It's to be able to make informed decisions that are relevant and that continue to evolve based on that feedback. It's critically important. So thank you for stepping into that role and being that leader there at Liberty. Not a small school, like was mentioned, but anyway, thank you again for your leadership. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you.
And do you have any family in the audience that you might want to recognize? Any photographers?
Yes, I do. I have my mother here to the right. I was grateful that she got to drive me here, and she was like, "Can I come?" And I said, "Of course you can." Yes, but thank you, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 6.2, board comments. Ms. Hill?
No comment.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingerelli?
I'm good.
All right, I do have one, and just really going back to Liberty High School, actually. Look, we're the fourth largest school district in our state, and we, what we do on a daily basis, and really what, the district does, our teachers, staff, district leadership at all the sites to, once again, problem solve, and we're there every day to make sure that our students are thriving, put in a position to be successful. All of our staff and our food service workers, they all have an impact, on our students without question. But one of the things that continues to really inspire me is the collective efficacy that goes on throughout this district. And I see that, as I walk classrooms, and that was absolutely evident at the academic awards ceremony earlier this week at Liberty High School. The number of students that were recognized for their academic excellence was amazing. So I do want to give a shout out to Miss Rudiper, is that correct? Okay. I know she spearheaded the event. I know she'll say, and it was a team effort, but how they brought together really the community, families, students, teachers, staff, and leadership in that setting to recognize these young scholars was amazing. So just, again, shout out to Liberty, shout out to the students who were recognized, and just really appreciate everybody's efforts throughout this district to do what's right on behalf of our young scholars. So thank you. All right, moving on to 6.3, superintendent comments. Dr. Reynolds.
Thank you, President Sandoval, Governing Board, Cabinet, and guests. We have had a fantastically busy week here in the Peoria Unified School District. It's been absolutely incredible, but if you look around at those of us in the room who've been attending all of these amazing events, we're a little tired. And so it is just absolutely incredible to be able to see what our students and our teachers are doing. But so I've got quite a few recognitions to go through. Yesterday we held 2 events. One was our annual college fair at the Peoria Sports Complex, where students were able to meet with more than 70 colleges and trade schools and start a pathway for post-secondary success. And I want to thank Ms. Marcy Bieber, who's our lead counselor, for all of her hard work and her team on planning that event. We also held our annual Healthy Harvest Fair for our Peoria Unified employees, where staff can learn about opportunities to live healthier lifestyle. Thank you to our benefits team, a small but mighty team who puts that on, and for a great event for our staff. Our benefits team, thank you for all the support that you provide, not only in this event, but throughout the entire year for our district. Last week, we celebrated National Bus Safety Week, where we highlighted our wonderful transportation department team employees who work tirelessly to ensure our students get to and from school safely every single day. I want to thank everyone in our transportation department, from our bus drivers to our dispatchers, our routers, our trainers, mechanics, everyone who supports getting our students to school. We just really appreciate all that they do and how much they prioritize safety. And so we thank them for that. On Tuesday evening, our Arts Education Department held a marching band showcase at Peoria High School, which features band from all 7 Peoria Unified High Schools. The stands were packed with attendees supporting these students and their talented band directors. And so we just, again, another opportunity to highlight our arts and all the hard work that our students do both in and out of the classroom. Tonight, we have our Met Professional Academy, and they're hosting their annual open house, where they will welcome prospective students and families to learn more about the signature programs offered by our Met. More than 400 guests have RSVP'd for this event. And I want to thank the Met staff and the leadership for offering students and their families this great opportunity to come and learn more about the STEM opportunities that we provide. And last but certainly not least, I attended the fall field trip this week, where we toured the Met Professional Academy, the Peoria Flex Academy, Ira A. Murphy Elementary School, and the Peoria High School. We toured with elected officials, local business owners, and community members. And this was my first fall field trip as superintendent, as we paused them for the last few years for obvious reasons. The tour provides a great experience for individuals to see opportunities available to students firsthand. And I want to thank the principals, the teachers, the support staff, and most importantly, the students at all of these sites, as well as Ms. Airy and her team, Aaron Dunsey, Sarah Meredith, Jacob Stanek from the Public Relations Office for their exceptional work planning this event. It really was something spectacular. So thank you for that, and that concludes my comments.
Thank you, sir. Got a lot of great stuff going on throughout the district. All right, with that said, that concludes our recognition. So if there is anybody in the audience who doesn't wish to continue along with us this evening, this is your moment to exit the boardroom. You're thinking about it. All right, moving on to section 7. Public comment. Request to address the governing board regarding matters not included on the agenda. As a matter of housekeeping, the board president shall keep control of the meeting and require the speakers and the audience to refrain from abusive or profane remarks, disruptive outbursts, applause, protests, or other conduct which disrupts or interferes with the orderly conduct of the business of the meeting. Personal attacks on board members, staff, or members of the public are not allowed. It is inappropriate to utilize a public hearing, the public comment segment, or any other agenda items for the purpose of making political speeches. Engaging in such conduct and failing to cease such conduct upon request of the presiding officer will be grounds for ending a speaker's time at the podium or for the removal of any disruptive person from the meeting room at the direction of the board president. With that said, we always welcome the voices of all our community, all opinions and perspectives. And our first public comment comes from Ms. Heather Rooks. Good evening.
Yes, good evening, board members, Dr. Reynolds, and guests. Recently, I've heard from multiple parents who are concerned about the bathrooms, specifically at the high school levels. Young girl students are uncomfortable to come out of the stalls in the bathrooms because of, specifically Liberty High School, they've talked about a boy transgender student in the bathroom. I know I've spoken to Dr. Carter Davidson, and I was told that this is a law to let the students into bathrooms and locker rooms that they identify with throughout the district. Apparently, the law was referred to the Title IX from the Biden administration. I found out that this law is actually being challenged as we speak by Arizona and other states. On July 15th, 2022, the federal district court issued an order temporarily blocking the Biden administration's documents, adding all of the criteria for allowing transgender students to go into the bathrooms and showers that they identify with on the Title IX. This is a judge ordering an injunction blocking this. I have emailed you all just about 5 minutes ago the actual injunction. So I believe that the Peoria district needs to pause and wait for the court resolution. For the time being, suggestions allowing those students to use the nurse's bathroom, or maybe looking into investing into a single bathroom like they have at the airports. London County, everyone's heard about it in the news, hopefully, is a perfect example for the safety of our young girls and what they are going through. We cannot let this continue with our young girls afraid to be in the bathrooms at school. We have heard also from students at Liberty High School that there are boys who utilize that law or that rule or wherever it's coming from to go into their bathrooms and be able to see the girls. So you're creating a liability situation, and this is being fought in court right now. So I don't know if you can have your lawyers look into it, but I emailed the actual injunction to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rooks. Okay, next public comment comes from Kim Baker. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Superintendent, President, board members. My name is Kim Baker. I'm here. There was a document. You all may have a copy of it. Jeremiah is a young man that I mentor. I'm actually on his contact at his school that he attends, which is Foothill. Jeremiah has received a 5-day suspension for typical 5th grader, okay? The problem I'm having with this is I met with the principal and the assistant principal concerning this matter this morning. I've been out all day on this up until this evening. And I'm trying to find out, on the referral, it has a discipline code of 53. Now, I have a copy of the handbook in which governs the student and staff. There is no discipline code of 53. And this bothers me because it makes me feel like it's personal now. Jeremiah, if you guys got to meet this kid, you would be really impressed with him, okay? But it saddens me that the voice of reason today was basically denied. And his mom and I were willing to compromise. He's into the second day of the suspension. If there's no rule that even governs why he was suspended, and what we suggested is we'll accept the 2 days that has taken place, being today, being the second, and let him return to school tomorrow. And we'll meet on Tuesday, and we can come together as a community to help Jeremiah understand all this process. And it sounded like we had an agreement until we got a call today at almost 3 o'clock denying the request. So I'm forced here tonight. There is no discipline code of 53 in the discipline book. He shouldn't be disciplined. He shouldn't be out of school right now. And this is bothering me and the family. And so I had to bring this to the board tonight. And I appreciate you all in your time, and hopefully someone can get with the principal. I would like to see him back in school tomorrow. That's why I came tonight. If there's no rule that supports why he's suspended, why is he out of school? I really appreciate you all's time, and if you all can help us get him back in school, please do. Thank you.
Thank you for your time, sir. Dr. Reynolds, cabinets, as always, if we can get back to...
Dr. Davidson's going to.
Okay. All right, I don't have any other green slips, so this concludes public comment for this evening. All right, moving on to section 10, action items, 10.1, science and math curriculum textbook adoption. Ms. Myers, Dr. Hernandez, welcome. So real quick before we start, I just want to make everyone aware we do have public comment tied to this line item. So we will allow district to present, public comment, and then we'll get into board questions and comments, okay?
Very good. And good evening, President Sandoval, members of the governing board, Dr. Reynolds, and community. Thank you for the opportunity to present information regarding the district's RFP for math and science curriculum textbook adoption. Tonight, Dr. Hernandez and I will both present information related to the district issuing an RFP to procure math and science curriculum and textbooks. We will highlight the district's approach, funding source, and timeline for governing board approval. Dr. Hernandez will now provide background information.
Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds, cabinet, and community. One of the priorities, okay, this is my first time, so click the slide. Down there? To the right, okay. One of the priorities in needing to adopt new materials for our science classrooms stems from the datedness of our existing materials. Currently, our K-8 classrooms utilize materials adopted during the 2003-2004 school year. Our high school classrooms utilize materials adopted as long ago as the 1990s. Secondly, the existing curriculum resources were designed and implemented prior to the state's adoption of the 2018 Arizona State Science Standards. Also, our state assessments test design, AZ-SCI, is not supported by our current materials. Similar to science, the datedness of our math materials is driving our need to update the materials in our math classrooms. While our current K-8 math materials were adopted during the 2015-2016 school year, Some of our high school math materials have not been updated since the 2000-2001 school year. Furthermore, in 2018, Arizona's new math standards that significantly increase the expectations for mathematical rigor and complexity in our classrooms were adopted. The district's current math materials for K-8 and high school do not reflect these expectations. Finally, our current math vendors are discontinuing their respective products at the conclusion of this school year, and they will no longer support in print or in digital the existing resources. Ms. Myers will now continue with our presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. There are statutory and policy-related requirements for textbook selection and procurement in Arizona when using non-federal funds. Arizona Revised Statute 15721 and 15722 vests authority in the governing board to select and acquire textbooks for elementary and high schools. Textbook selections are also covered under District Policy IJJ, which allows but does not require the superintendent to appoint a textbook selection committee to be part of the process. Under district policy, if the superintendent appoints a textbook selection committee, the committee forwards its recommendations regarding textbooks to the superintendent for consideration. State statute requires that all meetings of textbook selection committees be open to the public. Rule R7-1002C7 exempts textbook procurement from the Arizona School District procurement rules if the textbooks are purchased directly from the publisher. However, with this exemption, as a district may still go forward with a formal procurement solicitation and process. The governing board can determine whether and to what extent to involve a textbook selection committee in the governing board's textbook procurements. The governing board can also consider the recommendations of a textbook selection committee, but is not bound by them and cannot delegate its authority to make textbook selections and procurements to a textbook selection committee. The district is planning to use ESSER 3 grant funds for a textbook adoption. These are federal funds, and therefore this invokes the application of several federal regulations governing the expenditure of federal dollars and requires a formal procurement for any related purchases. This requirement consequently restricts the district from relying on Arizona Revised Statutes and the procurement exemptions that currently exist when moving forward with a textbook curriculum adoption, and will require the district to do a formal request for proposal, also referred to as an RFP. The state procurement rules require an RFP process to be a confidential process, and textbook selection committees complete their work in public. The school district procurement rules make no provision for the use of a textbook selection committee during a formal procurement. However, to have the ability to include parent, community, teacher, and student voice and input, a textbook advisory committee can be part of the RFP process with a set evaluation criteria and reporting structure to the RFP evaluation committee. Examples of individuals who may serve on both committees are detailed on this slide. You'll note there's a separate RFP evaluation committee with district representatives and employees, as well as an advisory committee that is comprised of district staff, but all of their work will be conducted in public, and all of those meetings will be open to parents, students, teachers, and our community. The request for proposal will have 5 evaluation criteria. The RFP evaluation committee will evaluate cost, which will be a primary determining factor, textbook content alignment to state standards, vendor responsiveness to the solicitation, and professional development that is available with the adoption. The textbook advisory committee will publicly review the method of approach criteria component of the RFP for the content areas of math and science and how responding publishers meet the needs of all student populations within the district. Parents, community, teachers, and students will have a voice in the process, as well as the opportunity to review materials over a 60-day period when materials are made available to the public. All textbook advisory committee meetings will be in public and will follow the requirements of open meeting law. The RFP Evaluation Committee will follow Arizona School District procurement requirements and will make a final recommendation to the superintendent to bring forward for governing board approval. The Textbook Advisory Committee will meet in public, capture community and parent input, and will provide a recommendation on the RFP evaluation criteria related to method of approach and how the textbooks and associated resources meet the needs of all of our student populations. Dr. Hernandez will now share examples of the review process related to standards alignment and methods of approach.
The RFP team will evaluate how well each vendor's product meets the Arizona state standards. This will be done for each standard at each grade level for K-8 and for each high school math course and science course. Secondly, the RFP team will evaluate how well the standards alignment meets the objectives for each specific K-8 grade level math and science course and each of our high school and math science courses. The Textbook Advisory Committee will meet in public to evaluate how well each vendor addresses the methods of approach for science and for math. The Textbook Advisory Committee will do its work during the 60-day public display to consider such areas as, for teachers, ease of planning, tiered support and intervention, hands-on learning, embedded technology, and assessment, to name a few. During the 60-day public display and comment period, parents, community members, teachers, and students are encouraged to review materials and provide feedback. A critical piece in understanding methods of approach included seeking out student voice. The Student Services team met with just under 50 students in our SEATS program, which is Students Engaging Administrators and Staff. During that time, students weighed in on the aspects of the materials that their teachers use. They provided us with high-quality feedback on some areas, such as students believed the importance of print and digital resources promoted accessibility features and real-world learning opportunities. Students believed and shared that materials must include a variety of engagement formats that apply to a variety of learners. Students believe classroom materials should incorporate career opportunities for them to learn about. Students believe the materials should support their teachers to create personalized learning, not a one-size-fits-all approach. To expand upon what we learned from our SEATS program, we spoke with the Superintendent's Student Advisory Council to further understand and expand on these areas. The students there shared with us further information underscoring those areas and others. That student voice criteria has been included within our evaluation process. As we are seeking teachers to join this important work, we are also asking them to provide feedback on their priorities for the updated curricular resources, even if they're unable to be a part of the review teams. We've also identified professional development days when teachers will be encouraged to review and provide feedback on resources during the 60-day public display and comment period. Ms. Myers will now continue.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. The RFP process is detailed on this slide, highlighting the RFP Evaluation Committee's role in the procurement process and the Textbook Advisory Committee's work and recommendations that will be made to the RFP Evaluation Committee. All 5 RFP evaluation criteria will become the basis of a final recommendation that will be brought forward for governing board approval. The tentative RFP timeline begins on October 28th, pending governing board approval this evening, with the release of the RFP publicly, and the RFP Evaluation Committee will begin their work in December. The Textbook Advisory Committee's work, including the 60-day public display, will take place from January 9th until April 11th. The RFP Evaluation Committee is scheduled to conclude their work in early May, and a recommendation for award is planned for governing board approval by the second board meeting in May. This concludes the presentation. Administration is available to answer your questions at this time after public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Dr. Hernandez. As Ms. Myers mentioned, we do have one public comment tied to this line item, and it comes from Ms. Heather Rooks.
Yes, hello, board members. I just had a question on the ESSER funds that was on that slide. Is there anything in the ESSER funding that we would use for the curriculum RFP? Is there any strings attached to that? Just so that if there is, can we know what it is? Can we share it with the public? I just know with the ESSER funds, sometimes there's things that go along with them. So just that was the only question I had. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Rooks. Board members, questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
Yes, I guess I had a couple of questions. Maybe a few moments to get back there. I know that, I can't remember if it was like 6 months ago or 8 months ago of this year, that we actually were in the process of trying to vet and consider other science programs and curriculum. And then due to cost, we decided to sideline it for the moment. So I guess I was wondering, are the same curriculums that we were looking at that time going to be reinstated, or are we going to consider other options with it, or what happened to the ones we were considering?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill. So when we paused that science adoption last year, it was last year, right? It wasn't due to cost. It was due to the procurement process. And so we recognized a flaw in that process. And so the presentation that you saw tonight reflects correcting that flaw. Yeah. And so we're starting the process over. It's not a matter of going back to where we were. We're starting from the beginning and then moving through.
Okay, I completely forgot. I guess it's been a long time. For some reason in my head I was thinking it was cost, so I apologize. So obviously we kind of, like you say, start over, so we might look at different curriculums, possibly some of the same that we looked at before. Is that correct? We're going to look at everything?
That's right. That's when we put out the request for proposal, assuming pending governing board approval, any vendors, any curricular resources that are out there can submit based on the criteria that we establish.
Okay, great. And I kind of have my cost question kind of answered there. And is the board able, and I think I've had this answered before, but is there no way that the board can make any suggestions on curriculum or at all? I mean, are we not able to say, hey, this is a good curriculum, it's like sex and math, et cetera? I mean, we're not able to do that?
So you have to approve the curriculum, right? So it would come to the board for your approval.
Right, but I cannot suggest, is what I'm saying.
You can certainly provide input as your individual
Okay, so that was my question.
Right.
I can suggest. So I don't know what, I've never been through the process of vetting curriculum before, but I was wondering if we are able to suggest curriculum, that we have found to be personally very, very good, if it meets the standards, so I was just wondering where, what we're allowed to or not allowed to do. So, but we can at least have some input. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
we just want to be really careful with the process, right? We don't want to jeopardize, the RFP process is a very prescribed process, and we don't want to get too far ahead of any decision-making that the board would need to make. So we can chat about that.
And Dr. Reynolds, if I may add a couple of additional comments. When the process was paused last December, January timeframe, the initial process that had been started was under the guidance of Arizona Revised Statute and district policy. And as I noted in my presentation, when you use federal funds, that requires a formal procurement solicitation. And because we had not started a formal RFP process last year, we were not able to complete the process with the intention of using federal grant dollars for the adoption. And in regard to your question on input, any community member will have the opportunity during the public display time period to provide feedback on the materials that are displayed, as well as the work that the Textbook Advisory Committee conducts in public.
Perfect. Yeah, like I said, I just wanted to see if there was, an opportunity for the public or myself or board members to have input, whether it's, whether it's taken or not, but just to have the input. And I'm going to make the presumption that we are looking at math, but we're not looking at Common Core math. Is that correct?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, through the RFP process, we have created the scope from which we are evaluating the products. The vendors will determine if they're able to meet that scope, and they will submit a proposal based on what we have said we are looking for in a math curriculum and a science curriculum. So that will be how we will get to that space.
And those are based on Arizona standards.
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
Yes, I have a few questions. So, and I know you probably don't have the exact figure, but is there a figure in mind on the overall expenditure for these purchases?
President Sandoval, members of the governing board, we don't have an estimate of what the final award cost will be because we have not gone through the process, but our last adoption was several $1 million. So we have set aside ESSER budget. At this point, if we were to do 2 adoptions this year and then an adoption next year as an example, that would be $20 million.
Thank you. Also, I was just curious, so the committees would be looking at both adoptions, is that correct? Okay.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, that's correct. Both math and science will be part of this RFP and will be evaluated at the same time, and recommendations in both areas will be brought forward for governing board approval in May.
Good. I think that's expedient. That's really good. And, I just want to make sure, obviously, that we have the expertise for both areas. Another question I just have, it's an open RFP? Do you anticipate, what number of RFPs or, proposals do you anticipate that you would receive?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, members of the governing board, the RFP will be published publicly, and all qualified responding vendors and publishing houses will have the opportunity to respond. So at this time, we don't have an estimate. I can certainly look to Dr. Hernandez with her recent experience, but we do think it will be a large volume, but I can't predict how many people will respond at this point, or I should say vendors.
Great. And then I just kind of a different question, but in regard to the parameters for evaluating these RFPs or these proposals, we were evaluating the product, correct? So I just want to make sure that we are evaluating the product and not necessarily the overall, realm of products that a publisher or a vendor produces. I just want to make sure that we are able to identify and truly evaluate the product based on its own merit. Is there some parameter within that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, members of the governing board, within the RFP, there'll be a scope and specification. And when you hear the reference of textbook, that means print and digital materials, as well as supplemental resources in the content areas. I can look to Dr. Hernandez if you'd like to provide some distinct examples of what that might be. Thank you.
And I just want to make sure, ask a clarifying question. I think what you're asking is that when a vendor replies to the RFP, that we're looking at math and science. We're not evaluating their program in ELA or social studies or anything like that. So it is specific to math and science.
That's what I'm requesting. I just want to make sure we're evaluating a product versus evaluating, like an entire company and their, breadth of whatever they publish.
That's correct. I don't have it.
All right.
He's got it.
Then I just have one last question. Is that right? Yes. I always have to number them because they come out in the wrong order. So I'm not fully clear on what we have in regard to even online supplemental materials. I know other districts have Discovery and those kinds of things, and I think they can be quite pertinent and relevant. So we'll be evaluating how some of those previously purchased materials might integrate with the curriculum that we do purchase.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, that is absolutely correct.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And I appreciate the process. It's really laid out well. And I can't tell you as a teacher how exciting this will be, because I've been one of those teachers looking for those 2003 resources, and God knows where they all are. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Representative Peoria?
I have no questions. Ms. Underhill asked the one that I was interested in, so thank you.
Very good. Yeah, no, I think for me, great question. Sorry from our board members here, but I do appreciate the process that you went through to define the scope of work and the criteria around adopting these textbooks, meaning student voice, and understanding that across our very large district that we have a diversity amongst our students, from just different levels, in their education and learning, right? And having that as a criteria as well. So thank you for that. And yes, I appreciate the process. We always are committed to being very transparent across all that we do as a district, and this area being, obviously being evident of that transparency and giving the community enough time to take a look at the options as well, and having feedback there. And it is quite a process, but it's a collective process, and I appreciate the inclusivity of certainly our students and then the community, and obviously all the resident experts here within Peoria Unified. So thank you for that. Thank you for all your work. And I know there was a question in public comment. I mean, if when you get a moment, if we can make sure that we address that, that'd be appreciated. All right. No further questions, comments? Thank you both very much. So that said, I do need a motion to approve 10.1, the science and math curriculum textbook adoption. I'll move that we approve 10.1, science and math curriculum textbook adoption.
So just, President Sandoval, I want to be very clear with this, right? We're approving the RFP.
I'm just reading off the action items, but yes, we're approving it looks like it's the process that we just went through, and all those details, and giving the district the really green light to go forward and receive all the responses.
Thank you, President Sandoval. We are asking for a motion for the governing board to approve the district issuing an RFP for a science and math curriculum textbook adoption, and I believe that is in the body of the agenda item.
It is. I just read off the agenda. So yes, let me rephrase my motion request. So I do need a motion to approve the district issuing a request for proposal for a science and math curriculum textbook adoption.
I'll second.
So Ms. Contra, actually, I just requested that motion. So if you want to move the motion, and then.
I move that the district approve issuing an RFP for a science and math curriculum textbook adoption.
And I'll second that. Ms. Contra, we have a motion made by Mrs. Underhill, second by myself. Board members, please cast your votes. Motion passes with 5 yeas. Ms. Myers, Dr. Hernandez, thank you both very much. Thank you, board members. All right, moving on to section 11, discussion items. I can press pause. Well, thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you. Okay, 11.1, annual M&O override and bond program update. Ms. Myers, welcome again.
Thank you. Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the governing board, Dr. Reynolds, and community. Thank you for the opportunity to present the fiscal year 2022 maintenance and operations override and 2012 bond program update. Tonight, I will provide background information on the annual maintenance and operations override and bond program update, as well as highlight override expenditures and bond projects over the last fiscal year. At the end of the presentation, administration will be available to answer your questions. School districts are required by statute to provide an annual update on overrides and bond program expenditures and remaining available funds at a public meeting between the dates of September 1st and October 31st. Tonight's presentation meets this requirement. Maintenance and operations expenditures are where most of the day-to-day expenditures take place for the district. This includes salaries and benefits, supplies, utilities, transportation, and other operational expenditures not of a capital nature. Maintenance and operation funds cannot be used for building repairs and renovations, as well as to build a new school or facility, as well as campus infrastructure. M&O is people, positions, and programs. Arizona revised statutes and the legislature does allow a school district to ask its community to approve an annual M&O budget increase through an override election to support positions and programs that may not be possible without the additional funding from the community in excess of what's received from the state each year. Arizona revised statutes allow an M&O override to exceed the maintenance and operations budget by up to 15% of the revenue control limit. Peoria Unified currently has a 13% override, which is supported through secondary property taxes throughout the district. The 13% override was first approved by our community in November of 2015. Once approved, an M&O override is authorized for up to 7 years. If the school district wants to extend the override beyond that original term, the override must be renewed by the voters. If not reapproved, the override phases out 1/3 in year 6 and 2/3 in year 7 and is fully eliminated in year 8. The Peoria Unified School District's community approved the continuation of the district's current 13% M&O override in November of 2020. The current M&O override funds assistant principals, nurses, and healthcare providers, athletics, extracurricular activities, PE, art, band and choir, and gifted and reading programs throughout the district. The funding also assists the district in maintaining class size, providing compensation to attract and retain quality teachers and staff, and provides funding for all-day kindergarten for our youngest learners, as the state only provides a half day of funding at this time. In fiscal year 2022, the M&O override provided $28.8 million of additional M&O funding for positions and programs throughout the district. With voter approval and authorization, public school districts may issue bonds which are purchased by investors to fund projects that have a useful life that is longer than 5 years. Examples include building improvements, HVAC, roofing and lighting, technology, school buses, and computers, technology equipment. Bonds are repaid over a set period of time. In November 2012, Peoria Unified's community approved a $180 million bond authorization for district-wide elementary and high school renovations, student transportation vehicle purchases, technology purchases, and district facility renovations. The bond authorization is also funded through secondary property taxes from residential and commercial property throughout the district, and annual tax rates are published as part of the district's annual budget adoption each year. Fiscal year 2022 bond program expenditures totaled $6.3 million. A voter-approved bond authorization is in place and in effect for 10 years, and bond proceeds from bond sales generally are expended within 3 years of the sale. The district did not have a bond sale last year, and in fact, our last bond sale in this program was in July of 2019. At this time, there are no additional bond sales that can take place within the 2012 bond authorization. The district is required to track expenditures by bond pamphlet category, and bond dollars can only be expended on voter-approved projects. In fiscal year 2022, $3.6 million was expended for elementary school projects, $1.8 million for high school renovations, and $834,000 was spent on buses for a total of $6.3 million of bond expenditures for the fiscal year. I will speak in just a moment to the remaining bond funds that you see on this slide. In fiscal year 2022, elementary school bond project expenditures included roofing, HVAC, which is heating and air conditioning, concrete, fencing for security, fire alarms, flooring, parking lot renovations, and playground-related projects. In the last fiscal year, high school bond projects included concrete, track, HVAC, fencing for security, flooring, irrigation, roofing, shade, and bleacher projects. Last year, we also purchased 5 new school buses for student transportation. During fiscal year 2022, additional projects were initiated, but due to vendor timing, supply chain issues, and related matters, the projects will be finalized this year. The remaining projects include a second school bus purchase, as well and those buses are currently on order, as well as sprinkler and irrigation projects at Cactus High School, HVAC-related projects at Marshall Ranch, Peoria Elementary, Vistancia, and the Warehouse Food Service Complex. Secondary property taxes on residential and commercial property within the district support the 13% M&O override and the 2012 bond authorization. In fiscal year 2022, the secondary tax rate was $2.44 per $100 of limited assessed valuation. In fiscal year 2023, the secondary tax rate is $2.23. The graph on this slide shows that over the last 6 years, year over year, the district's combined secondary tax rate has been declining. And that is in part due to the district continuing to amortize and to pay off previously issued bond sales. This concludes the annual bond and M&O override program presentation. The administration is available to answer your questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Myers. Board members, questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingrelli?
I'm good.
Thank you. Thank you. Mrs. Myers, thank you for the presentation. Just quick question. I mean, what's the timing on, us having to formalize like the Citizens Advisory Committee around the bond? I mean, is that something we need to do within the first quarter of 2023? Is it something?
Thank you. President Sandoval, members of the governing board, I have to be careful with the agenda item to stay within the scope of the update, but what I can reiterate is we have fully sold our bonds authorized under the 2012 program. We do not have any new bond dollars to support projects, priority and essential projects throughout the district. At session on October 17th, we did provide some detailed examples of ongoing needs. Our Citizens Advisory Committee last year did not recommend an election on November 8th this year, so our next opportunity for a bond election would be November 2023.
Yeah, gotcha. No, thank you for that, and I appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to 11.2, discussion on aggregate expenditure limit resolution. Dr. Reynolds.
Thank you, President Sandoval, Governing Board, Cabinet, and guests. This item this evening is just an opportunity for the Governing Board to talk and discuss about the potential future action on a resolution around the aggregate expenditure limit. Periodically, we will see these kinds of resolutions that sample resolutions that come out and give boards an opportunity to provide the Peoria perspective through that resolution. So it's just an opportunity tonight. The resolution is attached and gives you an opportunity to see if we want to make it an action item in the future.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. All right. Ms. Hill, questions, comments?
None at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
Yeah, I feel like it's really important for our district to come out and really support some action around this issue. This was a ginormous issue last year, and it continues to be that. It's kind of an odd issue to deal with because the legislature actually, accepts our budgets, and we've created budgets within those guidelines. However, the AEL then bumps up against us because it adds all that funding for all the districts across the state together. And so it doesn't jive because one is approved and the other is not. And frankly, it's really challenging because, that cap was set a long time ago. And obviously educational needs have changed in regard to technology and curriculum and inflation and everything else. So I really encourage our district to show the support it's not just our district either, it's the entire state, to do something about this conundrum that we sort of find ourselves in. And I feel like putting forth this resolution really supports our support as a district for students and families across the entire state. So I'm really hoping that just that effort will help our state government recognize that it's urgent, and we know that we can find a good solution, and we recognize their ability to do so. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Representative Pingerelli?
Do you know how many other districts have signed or done a resolution like this?
I have not. I haven't done any research. We'd have to go and look through governing board meetings and see who has. I don't have that information. If it's possible, we could, if there's an action item, we could bring that back as information.
So if it, so this is to have the governor call the legislature back into session this year. I know we have, the deadline is the end of March to come up with, I should have the exact date.
Yes, it's March 1st.
Is it March 1st? Okay. Okay, so there's, if the governor doesn't do that, there's a little bit of time. But it'll be a new legislature and a new governor, which is always interesting. So, thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pingerelli. Dr. Reynolds, I know there was a number of superintendents who signed on to, I'm going to say, a similar effort or something, just really advising, recommending, and pushing, our current leadership governor to call a special session. Is that correct? Or you were one of those superintendents who signed on to that?
Yes.
Okay. So for me, it's, from a matter of, consistency, across the district, and again, to Mrs. Underhill's point, to show, on our unwavering support of ensuring that, our youth are always supported in a way that they deserve. One of those ways is making sure that we have the resources to make sure that they're successful. Earlier today I mentioned, one of the recognitions that took place earlier this week, of those students who are thriving and doing well, academically. And I also mentioned, just the diversity across our district. And but I am proud of our teachers and staff who continue to meet our students where they're at. We have students who are, again, foster students, homeless, et cetera. But education's, it's changed. When we take a look at the current AEL, one that considers, considerations from 40 years ago. I mean, 40 years ago, districts were buying pencils and paper. Today we're buying, a lot of technology, which, costs a lot more than a ream of paper and a box of pencils without question. And knowing that, 80 to 90% of our operating budget is line item for people. If this doesn't get revised, extended during the time frame that Mrs. Pingarelli mentioned earlier, March 31st, was it March 1st? March 1st, thank you. That would absolutely, put our district in a detrimental position, without question. Because without the high caliber teachers and staff and people that we have across our district, the 4,000 plus, right? Again, we would be doing our young scholars, our students, those human lives that we're responsible for, a disservice. That said, I mean, for me, I think it's important to continue to push and make sure that our voice is heard, to make sure that our leadership, our governor, does call a special session, because I know we've talked about it before, and from a budgetary standpoint, Ms. Myers, you and your team, the ability to plan and manage what those dollars look like going into subsequent years, that takes time. For me, I think it's important to give that time, but also I think it's important, for our governor to also honor what the legislature did, which was extend on the budget going towards education, and by calling a special session, and which would, hopefully result in the extension or the revision, of the AEL, would support that. So for me, I absolutely, in favor of doing what we can as a district to be a voice, for our youth, for the lives that we serve, by certainly supporting this resolution. Any other questions, comments? Okay. All right. Dr. Reynolds, thank you, sir. Thank you, board members.
Thank you.
All right, 11.3, first read of policy section IJL. And we've got Dr. Hernandez.
President Sandoval, members of the board, policy IJL has been updated to reflect requirements of House Bill 2439 in that there is to be a public review of 60 days for purchased books and materials after July 1 of 2023. Purchased books and materials are to be listed on the district and school website during the review period. I can stand for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Questions, comments, board members? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen?
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
I do have some questions, and please guard me if I get outside of policy. But I'm just curious about, I did look on our educational resource site, and so I see our database that's available now as far as what items are approved and not approved. And so it just brought to mind a few questions. And one of those questions is just, what is the protocol? Where does the list come from for items that are pending or withheld or whatever within that database?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, the policy for IJL is specific to library materials selection and adoption. This is not for the supplemental resource materials process.
Okay, that makes sense. In regard to that, however, the same question comes up. So what is the process for approval, screening, et cetera, and who does that, and where do those guidelines come from for library books?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, currently the district has a lead librarian that supports our K-8 and our high school library staff. In the process, the books that are requested to be purchased at each respective school are sent to our lead librarian for review, and she has two different resources she utilizes to support that review. Upon successful review, books are then approved for purchase and the school is allowed to purchase them. If they are completely new to our inventory, only our lead librarian is able to enter the information into Destiny, which is our library system.
You mentioned that there are 2 resources that the lead librarian would refer to. What are those resources?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, the first resource is the school library and journal, and the second that comes from there is bookverdict.com.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that second one?
Bookverdict.com.
Okay. Okay. So there's not at this time like a statewide listing or anything like that. It's just coming from those sources.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, that is my understanding.
Okay. And this is somewhat related to library, but it's my understanding that there's also been lists of books that have been pulled from book fairs, which our library sponsor for fundraising. Does that figure into this? And how are those lists of books that are being pulled from those kinds of fairs determined?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, you are correct. The book fair process is separate from this particular process. The book fair process does, however, generate the funds that our current K-8 schools utilize to purchase books for their library.
Okay, and then the last question I have is I recognize that our libraries are already automated, so I would assume that at any point, as a parent, you can walk in and ask for a student's, what they've checked out, et cetera. So is there additional, costs associated with the work that we're doing, and how much is going into having to screen materials that we already have on the shelves?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, my next policy, IJNC, will speak to the parental requests for books and materials, but we are going to meet with our librarians on November 9th in order to work with them on the updated policy and law. And as we work through the process that I'll talk a bit more about when the regulation policy comes through, will help us identify those additional costs.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Representative Pingerelli?
No questions.
I don't have any questions either. All right, moving on to 11.4, first read of policy, section IJNC. Dr. Hernandez.
President Sandoval, members of the board, policy IJNC, which is closely tied to policy IJL, specifically directs the creation of procedures that provide parents with first, access to a school library's collection, and secondly, access to the list of books and materials their children have borrowed. I can stand for any questions.
All right. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
All right. Mrs. Underhill?
I guess I'm just curious, is this where we can ask about if there's additional costs or technology and costs associated with it, complying with this law?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, we utilize the Destiny Follett system for inventorying our text, so we already have the system in place to pull the reports that might be requested for either a library's collection or the individual materials borrowed by any specific student.
Great, and is there any back work that has to be done in order to, is there a lot of inventorying going on right now?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, at the start of the school year, our lead librarian shared that there were approximately 400 books that she was requested to consider for addition to the libraries. So in our policy work for the previous policy, we're looking at a procedure that would include 2 windows of time in which librarians could bring forward the opportunity to add new books to the library. And we will be establishing any estimated cost associated with that once we get these procedures in place.
Excellent, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Representative Pingerelli?
No questions.
All right. I don't either. So moving on to 11.5, first read of policy IMB. Dr. Hernandez?
President Sandoval, members of the board, policy IMB includes a change in language to clarify the role of the teacher and the role of the parent in that the teacher has responsibility for the formation of education of all students. I can stand for any questions.
All right, Ms. Hill?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So they changed influence to responsibility and values to education. So which is a good thing. So yeah, it's interesting that, you know, there's been such a big shift. So I find that interesting that that's occurred, but that's a good thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen? No, sir. Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
All right. Representative Pingerelli?
No, thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions either. Moving on to 11.6, first read of policy IMD. Dr. Hernandez?
President Sandoval, members of the board, policy IMD requires that schools set aside at least 1 minute, but not more than 2 minutes, at the beginning of each day for a moment of silence, and provides clarification that teachers may not tell children what to meditate on, and that teachers must encourage parents to discuss with their children how to utilize the moment of silence. I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Hernandez. Ms. Hill?
Okay, so as far as the moment of silence is concerned, obviously they're allowed to pray, I presume, and so they're allowed to clasp hands, put their head down. That's, I mean, can they take that posture if they wanted to? Is that acceptable, or are there other regulations as to what they can and can't do for that?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, that is correct. The only other additional clarification is that other students are not to interrupt how other students utilize that moment of silence.
So just one other question. Sometimes when you pray, you kind of, you're quiet, but you're kind of speaking to yourself and to God. Is that permissible if you're very quiet, or do you have to be completely silent? Is it truly a moment of silence?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, my assumption would be that as long as the student is speaking quietly and not interrupting the moment of silence by the child around them, that would be acceptable.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen? No, sir. Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingerelli?
No, thank you.
I don't have any questions either on that item. 11.7, first read of policy section JJIA. Dr. Davidson?
All right.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds. JJIA and the one that follows, JJIB, just wanted to highlight that they're both very similar. They're in regards to Senate Bill 1165, the Save Women's Sports Act, and that requires now that all school districts and charter schools designate their interscholastic or intramural sports based on the biological sex of the students who participate on that team or in the sport. You will see that the permissible categories are the following: males, men or boys; females, women or girls; or co-ed or mixed. The AIA has also followed suit and is in line with this law and policy. So I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
This is great. I'm very happy to see that they're making the designation so that we can separate out, you know, the boys from the girls in athletics. It's very important. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingerelli?
No questions.
I don't have any questions either. 11.8, first read of policy section JJIB.
Thank you, President Sandoval. This policy, as I said, is very similar to the other one. The first one is for intramural sports. JJIB is for interscholastic sports.
Okay. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thanks.
Representative Pingerelli? Okay. I don't have any questions either. Moving on to 11.9, first read of policy section JLCB. Dr. Davidson?
Thank you, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds. This particular policy states that an immunization for COVID-19 or any variant of COVID-19 is not required for school attendance. I'll stand for any questions.
Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
Representative Pingerelli?
I'm good.
I don't have any questions either. Moving on to 11.10, first read of policy section JRR. Dr. Davidson?
All right. Thank you, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds as well. House Bill 2161 gave us some insight on how we should or should not survey our students. What we know is that districts and charters are, as the law would read, cautioned to take special care when conducting a survey of students, soliciting any information that relates to the categories that are defined. The regulation now will hold that information, and there's, again, as it stated, 14 specific topics where we, in this case, as Peoria Unified, would not survey students around those particular topics. It does allow for the superintendent to create a process, but that process would certainly involve Dr. Hernandez and I, and we would not ask those surveys to move forward. So the other item I would share, if for some reason we chose to survey the students, we would have to give our parents at least 7 days in advance the opportunity to preview the survey, and we would have to have consent of that parent as well. So I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen? No, sir. Mrs. Underhill?
No, thank you.
All right. Representative Pingree? Good. All right. No questions for me either. Moving on to the last discussion item, 11.11, first read of policy section KB. Dr. Davidson.
All right. Thank you again, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds. This particular policy, KB, is quite robust, and you can see in the background there's a lot of new information that will come via the regulation as well as the different exhibits. KB in particular, though, the change revolves around a parent's ability to request for school district and employee electronic records regarding their students. So we're going to be certainly using this process, but allowing for it to occur and working with our site leadership to ensure that when parents do make that request, they get the specific information they're asking for. So that's the only change in this policy, as well as if for some reason we fail to follow that a parent could request relief if we violated the law. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, sir. Questions, comments? Ms. Hill?
No questions.
Dr. Sorensen? Mrs. Underhill? Representative Pingree? Good. All right. Dr. Davidson, Dr. Hernandez, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to section 12, informational reports, report on upcoming meetings and events. Ms. Airy.
Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the board, Dr. Reynolds. Just a reminder for our community that November 8th is Election Day, and as always, we encourage our community to exercise their right to vote.
All right, thank you very much. All right, 12.2, legislative state and local updates. Ms. Myers.
Thank you, President Sandoval, members of the governing board. I do not have a report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on, 12.4, district budget reports for the month of July 2022. These reports are on our website for reviewing at your convenience. 12.5, district budget report for the month of August 2022, also on our website. 12.6, district enrollment reports for the month of September 2022, also on our website. All right, moving on to section 13, other business, 13.1, board member opportunity to readdress agenda items. Ms. Hill, any items that you'd like to readdress?
No, thank you.
All right, Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill? Representative Pingree? I don't have any either. 13.2, request for agenda items for future governing board meetings. Ms. Hill, any items that you'd like to add?
None at this time.
Dr. Sorensen?
No, sir.
Mrs. Underhill?
Yes, I have a couple. One is, if it's discussion action to move into the reconvening of the Citizens Action Advisory Committee for the purposes of exploration of a bond election.
I'll second that.
And the second one is either discussion action on a resolution on behalf of the PSUD board encouraging a special session regarding the AEL.
I'll second that.
And that's all. Thank you.
All right. Representative Pingree? All right. All right. I don't have any items either. That said, we'll move on to 14.1, adjournment. I do need a motion to adjourn this meeting at 7:29 p.m.
I move to adjourn.
I'll second that. Ms. Contra, we have a motion made by Ms. Hill to adjourn this meeting at 7:29, a second made by myself. Board members, please cast your votes. Motion passes with 5 yeas. Board members, thank you. Cabinet, thank you. Community members, thank you. Everybody have a great evening. Stay safe.